I remember the exact moment my world stopped turning. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and the trees along Michigan Avenue were shedding their leaves in waves of burnt orange and deep crimson. Chicago had that particular autumn chill in the air, the kind that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter and walk a little faster. I'd just left Northwestern Memorial Hospital, clutching a folder of test results I didn't fully understand, but knew enough to fear. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer, inoperable, 6 months, maybe less. Dr. Hernandez had delivered the news with the kind of practiced gentleness that told me he'd done this before, too many times before. He'd used words like aggressive and metastasized and palliative care, but all I heard was the clock starting its final countdown. I was 43 years old. I had a mortgage I'd never pay off, a garden I'd never see bloom again, and a golden retriever named Cooper waiting for me at home who had no idea his entire world was about to collapse. The walk from the hospital to the parking garage felt surreal, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. People passed me on the sidewalk, a woman laughing into her phone, a delivery guy balancing pizza boxes, a couple arguing about dinner plans, and I wanted to grab them by the shoulders and scream, "Don't you understand? Don't you know how precious this is? This ordinary, beautiful, infuriating life you're living?" But I didn't. I just kept walking. My hands shook as I fumbled with my car keys. The folder slipped from my grip and papers scattered across the concrete. CT scans, blood work panels, treatment options that weren't really options at all. I crouched down to gather them, and that's when the tears came. Not the gentle, cinematic kind you see in movies. These were ugly, gasping sobs that tore through my chest and left me kneeling on the cold garage floor, surrounded by medical documents that sentenced me to death. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the autumn sun to sink lower, casting long shadows through the garage's concrete pillars. Long enough for my knees to ache and my throat to go raw. Long enough to realize that I had to go home and face Cooper, who would greet me at the door with his tail wagging and his whole body wiggling with joy, completely unaware that I was about to break both our hearts. The drive back to my house in Oak Park took forever and no time at all. I lived in a small 2-bedroom bungalow with a fenced backyard and a front porch that desperately needed repainting. I'd bought it 5 years ago, right after my divorce from Sarah was finalized. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Cooper and I had made it home. I sat in the driveway for a long time, engine off, staring at the yellow glow of the porch light I'd left on that morning when life was still normal, when I still had a future. Through the front window, I could see Cooper's silhouette, pacing back and forth, waiting for me the way he did every single day. That dog had the most reliable internal clock. He knew when I was supposed to be home, and he'd position himself by the door a full 10 minutes before I arrived, ready to launch into his greeting ritual. God, how was I going to tell him? The absurdity of that thought almost made me laugh. You can't tell a dog he's about to lose his person. You can't explain cancer or chemotherapy or the fact that his whole life is about to be turned upside down. But somehow, some way, I knew I had to prepare him, prepare us both. I finally forced myself out of the car. The moment I opened the front door, Cooper was there, all 75 pounds of golden fur and unbridled enthusiasm. He jumped up, his paws landing on my chest, his tongue trying to reach my face as his tail created a small windstorm behind him. It was his standard greeting, the one I usually pretended to be annoyed by while secretly loving every second of it. "Down, Coop. Down, buddy," I said, but my voice cracked and he must have heard something wrong in it because he immediately dropped to all fours and cocked his head to the side, studying me with those impossibly brown eyes. Dogs know. I don't care what anyone says. They know when something's wrong. Cooper pressed his body against my legs and looked up at me with an expression I'd never quite seen before. Concern, maybe, or recognition that the person who'd just walked through the door wasn't quite the same person who'd left that morning. I sank down to the hardwood floor, right there in the entryway, and Cooper climbed into my lap. All 75 pounds of him. He was too big to be a lapdog, but he'd never accepted that fact. He wormed his way as close to me as physics would allow, resting his head on my shoulder and releasing a long, contented sigh that suggested everything was right with the world as long as we were together. I buried my face in his fur. He smelled like the dry leaves he'd been rolling in that morning, and the salmon dog food I'd switched him to last month, and something indefinably Cooper, that warm, slightly sweet scent that was his alone. I held him and cried into his neck, and he didn't move, didn't squirm or try to break free. He just stayed there, solid and warm and utterly present in a way that made my chest ache. "I'm so sorry, buddy," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Cooper licked my ear, which was his way of saying he forgave me, even though he didn't know what he was forgiving me for yet. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of phone calls and appointments and impossible decisions. I had to tell my boss at the architectural firm where I worked. Had to tell my sister Amy, who lived in Boston with her husband and their 2 kids. Had to tell my parents, who were retired in Arizona and immediately started making plans to fly out. Had to tell my ex-wife Sarah, who cried on the phone and said all the right things, even though we hadn't spoken more than a handful of times since the divorce 3 years ago. Everyone wanted to know what I was going to do. Was I going to fight it, try chemo, look into clinical trials, move in with family, get my affairs in order? I didn't know. I didn't know anything except that every morning when I woke up, Cooper was there. Every evening when I came home from another devastating appointment, Cooper was there. Every night when I couldn't sleep and wandered the house at 3 a.m., Cooper followed me from room to room, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. Dr. Patel, my oncologist, laid out my options with brutal honesty. I could try chemotherapy, but with cancer this advanced, it would only buy me a few extra months at best. Months I'd spend sick and weak and probably wishing I'd chosen differently. I could enroll in a clinical trial, but the odds of it working were minuscule, and the side effects could be worse than the disease. Or I could opt for palliative care, pain management and hospice when the time came, and focus on quality of life for whatever time I had left. "What would you do?" I asked him. "If you were me?" Dr. Patel had kind eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been recommended by a colleague, and I could see why. He didn't rush, didn't make me feel like just another terminal case on his schedule. "I'd think about what matters most," he said quietly, "and I'd spend my energy on that." What mattered most was sitting at home, probably napping on the couch with his head hanging off the edge at an angle that looked profoundly uncomfortable, but that he somehow found perfect. I chose palliative care, no chemo, no clinical trials, just pain management and whatever time I had left to live as normally as possible. My sister flew out the following week. Amy was 3 years older than me and had always been the responsible one, the one who made lists and planned ahead and never left anything to chance. She walked into my house like a general deploying for battle, armed with casserole dishes and cleaning supplies, and a determination to fix everything that couldn't be fixed. "You can't stay here alone," she said, unpacking groceries into my refrigerator with military efficiency. "You need to come to Boston. Stay with us. The kids would love to have you, and Marcus is already setting up the guest room. Amy, don't Amy me. You're sick. You need family. I have Cooper." So she turned to look at the dog, who was watching her from his bed in the corner, with what I'd come to recognize as his suspicious stranger face, ears slightly back, body tense, ready to bark if this invader made any sudden moves toward his person. "You can bring Cooper," she said, softening slightly. "We have a yard. The kids would love a dog. Your kids have allergies." "Maddie's allergy isn't that bad." "Amy!" I said it firmly enough that she stopped talking and actually looked at me. "I'm staying here. This is my home, Cooper's home. We're staying." For a moment, I thought she'd argue. But then, something in her face crumbled, and suddenly she wasn't my bossy older sister anymore. She was just someone watching her baby brother die and desperately trying to pretend she had any control over it. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Me neither." She stayed for 4 days, filling my freezer with meals and organizing my medications and creating elaborate care schedules that we both knew I'd probably ignore once she left. But it was her way of loving me, and I let her. On her last night in Chicago, we sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching Cooper patrol the fence line in the fading October light. He'd always been an attentive guardian, checking the perimeter every evening, making sure no squirrels or possums or mysterious threats had breached our territory while he was occupied with dinner. "He's a good dog," Amy said. "The best." "What's going to happen to him? After?" And I'd been avoiding that question with the same determination I'd been avoiding updating my will and picking out a cemetery plot and all the other administrative tasks of dying. But Amy was right to ask. I needed a plan. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sarah offered to take him, but she's in that tiny apartment in Wicker Park now, and Cooper needs space, needs a yard. We could—" "Your kids are allergic, and Marcus barely tolerates pets." Amy didn't argue because we both knew it was true. Her husband was a good man, but he was not a dog person. "There's got to be someone," she said. "There is. I just haven't figured out who yet." But the truth I couldn't say out loud, was that I didn't want anyone to take Cooper. I wanted him to stay mine, to be my dog for as long as I was still here to be his person. And what happened after, I couldn't think about after. Cooper finished his patrol and trotted back to the porch, tongue lolling, tail wagging, looking enormously pleased with himself for successfully defending our territory from threats both real and imagined. He climbed the steps and settled at my feet, resting his chin on my shoe with a contented groan. "Yeah, buddy," I murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "We're okay. We're okay." But I didn't know if I was telling him or telling myself. And as the autumn nights grew longer and the pain in my abdomen grew sharper, I held on to one truth with desperate certainty. Whatever time I had left, Cooper and I would face it together. November arrived with the kind of cold that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. The trees along my street were bare now, skeletal branches scratching against a grey sky that seemed to press down on the whole city. Chicago winters had always been harsh, but this one felt personal, like the universe itself was reflecting the decay happening inside my body. The pain came in waves at first, manageable, ignorable, if I tried hard enough. Dr. Patel had prescribed pain medication, a progression from over-the-counter pills to prescription strength to, eventually, the serious stuff that came with addiction warnings and careful dosage instructions. I filled the prescriptions, but left most of them in the cabinet, clinging to some stubborn belief that if I didn't take them, maybe the cancer wasn't really as bad as they said. Cooper knew better. He started following me everywhere, not just room to room, but everywhere. If I went to the bathroom, he waited outside the door. If I took a shower, he laid on the bath mat. If I tried to work from home at my desk, he positioned himself under my chair, a warm presence pressed against my feet. At night, he abandoned his dog bed entirely and climbed onto the mattress, curling into the space behind my knees or stretching out alongside me with his head on the pillow we'd once insisted was for humans only. "You're spoiled rotten," I told him one morning as he gazed at me from my pillow, having somehow migrated from the foot of the bed to the prime sleeping real estate during the night. He wagged his tail lazily, completely unrepentant. "The thing about dying slowly is that you don't just lose your future, you start losing your present too. Things that used to be automatic become exhausting. Taking Cooper for his morning walk required planning and rest breaks. Cooking dinner became a negotiation between appetite and nausea. Showering left me winded. Getting dressed was a tactical operation. By mid-November, I'd gone on medical leave from work. My boss, Tom, had been understanding. Probably too understanding, the kind of gentle kindness that made it clear he didn't expect me to ever come back. My colleagues sent a fruit basket and a card, signed by everyone in the office. I put the card on the refrigerator and watched the fruit slowly rot in its basket, because everything tasted like cardboard now, and eating felt like a chore I couldn't muster the energy for. Cooper, however, had very strong opinions about meal times. His were non-negotiable. Every morning at 7, he'd appear beside the bed with his tail wagging and his leash in his mouth, ready for breakfast and his walk. Every evening at 6, he'd sit by his food bowl and stare at me with laser focus until I got up and filled it. His routine became my routine, the only structure keeping me tethered to the normal rhythms of life. "You're a tyrant, you know that?" I said one morning as he dropped his leash on my chest for the 3rd time, having correctly assessed that I was awake but trying to pretend otherwise. He boofed, that soft, insistent noise that was halfway between a bark and a grumble, and picked up the leash again. Fine, I'm getting up." Our walks got shorter. The route that used to take us through the neighborhood and to the park, a solid 45 minutes of Cooper sniffing every tree and fire hydrant while I sipped coffee and listened to podcasts, shrank to a slow loop around the block. Then half a block. Then just to the end of the driveway and back. Cooper never complained. He adjusted his expectations, slowing his pace to match mine, pausing whenever I needed to catch my breath or lean against a fence post or just stand still for a moment and wonder how I'd gotten so weak so fast. One morning in late November, I made it halfway down the driveway before my legs gave out. Not dramatically, no collapse or fall. They just stopped working. One moment I was standing, the next I was sitting on the cold concrete, Cooper's leash still in my hand, staring at my house like it was a million miles away instead of 30 feet. Cooper immediately circled back to me, his walk forgotten. He pressed his body against mine and licked my face with urgent concern. That low whine building in his throat that meant something was wrong and he didn't know how to fix it, but he was going to try anyway. "I'm okay," I told him, but we both knew I was lying. I sat there for what felt like forever, gathering the energy to stand. The morning was brutally cold. Frost on the grass, my breath coming out in white puffs, my hands going numb where they pressed against the concrete. Finally, I managed to get to my feet, using Cooper's solid presence as leverage, and we made our slow, humiliating way back inside. I called Amy that afternoon. "I need help," I said, and the words felt like defeat. She was on a plane the next morning. This time when she arrived, she didn't come alone. My parents flew in from Arizona, Mom with her endless supply of worried energy, and Dad with his quiet, steady presence that had always been the foundation I built my life on. They moved into my house like a well-coordinated team, taking over the cooking and cleaning and medication management while I retreated to my bedroom with Cooper and tried to pretend I wasn't losing my independence along with everything else. "You need to eat," Mom said, appearing in my doorway with a tray of soup and crackers for the 3rd time that day. "Not hungry." "Richard." She used my full name, which meant she wasn't asking anymore. "You need your strength." "For what?" I snapped, and immediately felt terrible because she flinched like I'd hit her. I'm sorry, Mum, I know." She set the tray on my nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Cooper, who was curled against my side like a living heating pad. "I know, honey." Or she didn't push the soup, just sat there for a while, her hand resting on mine, both of us pretending not to notice the tears slipping down her cheeks. The pain got worse. That's the thing they don't tell you about cancer. It's not just the dying that hurts, it's the living with dying. Every day brings some new indignity, some fresh loss. I started taking the serious pain medication, the ones that made the world fuzzy and distant, but at least took the edge off the fire burning through my abdomen. Cooper didn't leave my side. If the medication made me drowsy, he stayed on the bed, his body warm and solid against mine. If I got up to stumble to the bathroom, he followed, his nails clicking on the hardwood. If I had a bad night, and there were many, many bad nights, he pressed his nose against my hand and breathed with me until the pain medication kicked in and I could breathe normally again. My family didn't understand it at first. Maybe we should set up a dog walker, Amy suggested one morning while I was having a rare good hour, sitting at the kitchen table with Cooper's head in my lap. Give you some space, let you rest. He doesn't need a dog walker. Rick, you can barely walk around the block. Cooper needs exercise. He needs me, I interrupted, and I need him. So drop it. Amy exchanged a look with Dad that I pretended not to see. They thought I was being stubborn, irrational. They didn't understand that Cooper wasn't just my dog anymore. He was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Dr. Patel visited the house in early December. Hospice was officially involved now, which meant nurses coming by twice a week to check my vitals and adjust my medications and speak in those carefully modulated voices that healthcare workers use with the dying. But Dr. Patel still came personally, which I appreciated more than I could say. He did his examination, the gentle pressing on my abdomen that made me wince, the questions about pain levels and appetite and bowel movements that were somehow both clinical and compassionate, while Cooper watched from his bed in the corner. "How are you doing?" Dr. Patel asked when he was finished, settling into the chair beside my bed with the kind of unhurried presence that suggested he had all the time in the world, even though I knew his schedule was packed. "Dying," I said flatly. "Yes, but how are you doing?" It took me a moment to understand the distinction. "Scared," I finally admitted. "Angry. Tired. That's normal." "Is it normal to feel guilty?" "What do you feel guilty about?" I looked at Cooper, who had abandoned his bed and was making his way over to us, probably sensing that we were talking about him. Him. He doesn't understand why I can't play anymore, why I can't take him to the park, why I sleep all day and barely get up. He thinks he did something wrong. Dr. Patel followed my gaze. "Dogs don't think like that, don't they?" "Udi." Cooper reached the bed and rested his chin on the mattress beside my hand, those brown eyes looking up at me with absolute devotion. "Have you thought about what happens to him?" Dr. Patel asked gently. "After?" "Everyone keeps asking me that." "Because it's important. I know it's important. My voice cracked. "I can't think about after. If I think about after, I have to think about him being alone, confused, waiting for me to come home and not understanding why I never do, and I can't bear that." Dr. Patel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My grandmother used to say that dogs understand death better than we do, that they live so completely in the present that they don't worry about tomorrow the way we do. They just love while they can. That doesn't make it easier." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." After he left, I lay in bed with Cooper curled against me and thought about that conversation, about living in the present, about loving while you can. Outside my window, snow had started to fall. Fat, lazy flakes that covered the bare trees and dead grass in white, making everything look clean and new and possible. "We're not done yet," I whispered to Cooper. "You hear me, buddy? We're not done." His tail thumped once against the comforter, and that was answer enough. The next morning, I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The pain was still there, always there now, a constant companion, but my mind felt sharp, focused. I looked at Cooper, who was sprawled across 3/4 of the bed, snoring softly with his paws in the air. I'd been so focused on dying that I'd forgotten to live. "Come on, Coop," I said, struggling to sit up. "We're going to the park." It was a ridiculous plan. It was December in Chicago. I could barely walk to the bathroom. The park was a mile away, but suddenly, fiercely, I needed to go, needed to give Cooper one more real adventure before my body gave out completely. I got dressed slowly, layering on sweatpants and a hoodie, and the heavy winter coat I hadn't worn in weeks. Cooper watched with increasing excitement, recognizing the signs of an outing. By the time I'd managed to get my shoes on, he was spinning in circles by the front door, leash in mouth, practically vibrating with joy. Okay, calm down," I laughed, and God, it felt good to laugh. We drove to the park. I knew better than to attempt walking there. The streets were empty this early, the city still asleep under its blanket of snow. I parked in the lot nearest to the open field where Cooper loved to run, and we made our slow, careful way through the gate. The park was transformed by winter. What had been green grass was now white and pristine, unmarked by footprints. The playground equipment looked like abstract sculptures under their caps of snow. The pond was frozen solid, a grey sheet of ice reflecting the pink-tinged dawn sky. I unclipped Cooper's leash. He looked at me, confused. We always kept him leashed at the park. Rules were rules. "Go on," I urged. "Go play." For a moment he didn't move. Then, like a rocket launching, he took off across the snow, kicking up white powder behind him, his ears flying, his tail streaming out like a flag. He ran in huge, looping circles, diving into snowdrifts and emerging covered in white, barking at nothing and everything, pure joy made visible. I stood there, leaning against a bench for support, watching him run, and felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain this time, something else, something that felt almost like peace. Cooper circled back to me, panting hard, his tongue lolling in a ridiculous grin. He was covered in snow, and his eyes were bright, and he looked so completely, utterly alive that I wanted to memorize this moment. Stamp it permanently in whatever part of me would survive death, if anything did. "Good boy," I managed, my voice thick. "Such a good boy." We stayed until the sun was fully up and my legs were shaking with exhaustion, and Cooper had explored every inch of snow-covered ground at least 3 times. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the passenger seat, his head on my thigh, still grinning in his dreams. I carried that morning with me through the dark days that followed, holding it close like a talisman. Because Dr. Patel was right, we couldn't control tomorrow, but we could choose how we spent today. And as Christmas lights began appearing in windows up and down my street, I made myself a promise. Whatever time I had left, Cooper and I would fill it with as much living as we could possibly manage. By Christmas, I'd accepted that I was dying. What I hadn't accepted was dying badly. The hospice nurse, a woman named Janet with kind eyes and an unfailing ability to show up exactly when I needed her most, had started talking about comfort measures and pain management and preparing for the end. She meant well. They all meant well. My parents, my sister, Dr. Patel, the parade of well-meaning friends who'd started stopping by with casseroles and sympathy cards, like I was already gone. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. Cooper seemed to understand this better than anyone. While everyone else treated me like a ghost already haunting my own life, he treated me like his person. The same person who'd brought him home from the shelter 5 years ago, who taught him to sit and stay and come, who let him sleep on the bed even though the shelter had promised he was crate-trained, who accidentally taught him that good boy meant he was about to get a treat and then had to follow through on that promise at least 50 times a day. On Christmas morning, I woke up to find Cooper staring at me from approximately 3 inches away, his tail wagging slowly, his breath warm on my face. "Merry Christmas, Coop," I whispered. He boofed softly and licked my nose, then jumped off the bed and trotted to the door, looking back expectantly. Our morning routine. Even on Christmas, even when every movement sent sharp pains through my abdomen, even when I was on enough medication to fell a horse, Cooper expected his walk. I'd learned not to fight it. The routine kept me moving, kept me living. We made it to the end of the driveway and back. A pathetic distance, but it was something. Inside, my parents were already up, the smell of coffee filling the house. Mom had insisted on cooking a full Christmas dinner, despite my protests that I couldn't eat, wouldn't eat, shouldn't eat. Dad had strung lights around the living room and set up a small tree in the corner. Nothing like the elaborate decorations we'd had when I was a kid, but enough to make the house feel festive rather than funereal. Amy and her family arrived around noon. The kids, Maddie, who was 10, and Jack, who was 7, burst through the door with the kind of chaotic energy that only children can generate. They'd been warned to be gentle, to be quiet, to remember that Uncle Rick was very sick. They'd nodded solemnly, and promised to be good. That lasted approximately 15 minutes. Uncle Rick, watch this," Jack shouted, demonstrating some complicated move he'd learned in his karate class, nearly knocking over a lamp in the process. "Can I give Cooper a treat? Please?" "Mom said I had to ask first," Maddie said, already digging in her pocket for the dog biscuits she'd apparently brought specifically for this purpose. Cooper, who'd been watching the children with wary interest from his position beside my chair, decided they were acceptable humans and began wagging his tail. Within minutes, they were rolling around on the floor together, the kids laughing while Cooper licked their faces and play-bowed, and generally forgot he was supposed to be my solemn guardian dog. "I'm sorry," Amy said, watching the chaos with an expression torn between amusement and concern. "I can make them settle down." "Don't," I interrupted. "It's good. It's normal." And it was. For the first time in weeks, my house felt alive, filled with noise and laughter and the sweet, uncomplicated joy of children who didn't yet understand how to be afraid of death. We ate dinner around the kitchen table, or at least everyone else ate, while I pushed food around my plate and pretended not to notice Mom watching me with worried eyes. Cooper positioned himself between my chair and Jack's, having correctly identified Jack as the most likely source of dropped food. The kid had terrible table manners, something Amy kept trying to correct and Jack kept strategically ignoring, which made him Cooper's new best friend. After dinner, we opened presents. The kids had made me drawings. Maddie's was a surprisingly good portrait of Cooper. Jack's was an abstract explosion of colour that he insisted was also Cooper, and I taped them to the refrigerator next to the card from my co-workers. Amy gave me a fleece blanket. Mom gave me a framed photo of Cooper and me from last summer. Dad gave me a book I'd never have time to read but appreciated anyway. I'd bought presents weeks ago, back when I could still drive myself to the store. Small things, toys for the kids, gift cards for my parents, a necklace for Amy. But I'd also bought something for Cooper, a new collar, bright red with his name embroidered in gold thread, and a matching leash. "Pretty fancy for a dog collar," Dad observed, as I fastened it around Cooper's neck, replacing the worn blue one he'd been wearing for years. "He deserves fancy," I said, adjusting the fit. Cooper stood patiently through the process, then immediately tried to lick my face in thanks, nearly knocking me over in the process. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, I sat on the couch with Cooper's head in my lap, staring at the lights on the Christmas tree. The pain medication had kicked in, making the world soft and slightly distant, but not so much that I couldn't think clearly. I'd been dying for 2 months now, 2 months of watching my body fail, of losing weight and strength and independence. 2 months of everyone treating me like I was already gone, of conversations happening in whispered tones when they thought I couldn't hear, of sympathetic looks and gentle touches and the suffocating weight of other people's pity. But Cooper didn't pity me. Cooper just loved me. And somewhere in that simple truth, I found something I'd been missing. Defiance. "I'm not done yet," I told him, scratching behind his ears in the spot that always made his back leg kick. "You hear me, buddy? I'm not done." The next morning, I called Dr. Patel. "I want to try," I said when he answered. "The chemo, the clinical trials, whatever you've got, I want to fight." There was a long pause. "Rick, we discussed this. The cancer is too advanced. I know what we discussed. I'm saying I changed my mind. The side effects alone, I don't care about side effects. I'm dying anyway. What's the worst that can happen? I die a little faster. At least I'll die fighting." Another pause. Then quietly, "What changed?" I looked at Cooper, who was watching me with those impossibly brown eyes, his tail wagging slowly. I remembered I have something to live for. Dr. Patel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Let me make some calls." 2 days later, I was sitting in an examination room at Northwestern, going through the intake process for a clinical trial, testing an experimental drug combination for advanced pancreatic cancer. The odds weren't good. The trial coordinator made that clear. Only 15% of participants showed any response, and response didn't mean cure. It meant maybe buying a few extra months. Maybe. "I'll take maybe," I said, signing the consent forms. They started treatment the first week of January. The medication came in pill form, which was a small mercy. No IVs, no hospital stays, just swallowing 6 different pills twice a day and hoping they'd do something other than destroy what was left of my digestive system. The side effects were brutal. The nausea was constant, a rolling wave that never quite crested but never fully receded either. Food tasted like metal. Water tasted like chemicals. I lost more weight, my clothes hanging off my frame like I was a child playing dress-up in an adult's closet. My hair started thinning, my skin took on a greyish tinge. I felt like I was poisoning myself, which I guess I was, fighting poison with poison and hoping something good came from the combination. But I kept taking the pills, kept showing up for the weekly blood draws and scans, kept fighting. Cooper adapted to this new reality the same way he'd adapted to every other change, with patience and presence. When the nausea was bad and I couldn't leave the bathroom, he laid on the tile floor beside me. When the exhaustion was overwhelming and I couldn't get out of bed, he stayed with me, his body warm against mine. When I had good days, rare, precious good days, where the medication seemed to ease up and I could function almost normally, he celebrated with me, his tail wagging, his whole body wiggling with joy. "You're not supposed to be my emotional support human," I told him one morning in late January as we made our slow circuit around the block. "I'm supposed to be taking care of you." He looked up at me with an expression that clearly communicated he had no idea what I was talking about, and also could we please investigate that interesting smell coming from the neighbor's trash can. The weeks blurred together. Winter deepened, Chicago burying itself under layer after layer of snow and ice. My parents went back to Arizona after Amy promised to check in regularly. My sister called every other day, managing to sound simultaneously supportive and worried in a way that made me want to throw my phone across the room. Friends stopped visiting as often, not because they didn't care, but because watching someone fight cancer is exhausting, and eventually people need to protect their own hearts. Cooper never needed protection. He just kept showing up. Tentar novamente, T continuar, editar in February. I had my first follow-up scan since starting the trial. I sat in the waiting room at Northwestern with my heart hammering against my ribs, Cooper's leash wrapped around my wrist. I'd gotten special permission to bring him, something about emotional support animals and compassionate care policies. The nurses loved him. He'd charmed his way through the oncology ward, visiting patients who lit up at the sight of a friendly dog, making everyone forget for a moment why they were there. Dr. Patel called me into his office personally, rather than having a nurse deliver the results. That could mean anything. Good news, bad news, no news. "Your tumor markers are down," he said, pulling up the scan images on his computer screen. "Not dramatically, but measurably. The primary tumor has shrunk by about 18%. I stared at the images, the ghostly white shapes that represented the cancer eating me alive. 18%. It's not a cure, Rick. I need you to understand that. But it's something. The medication is working, at least for now. For now, I repeated. These trials can be unpredictable. Some patients respond for a few months, then plateau or decline. Others maintain steady improvement. There's no way to know which category you'll fall into. But right now, today, I'm better than I was. Right now, today, yes, you're better than you were. I felt Cooper's nose press against my hand, and I realized my whole body was shaking, not from weakness this time, from something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. "What do I do?" I asked. "Keep taking the medication. Keep fighting. And Rick," Dr. Patel's expression softened, "keep doing whatever else you're doing, whatever's keeping you motivated, because that matters too." I looked down at Cooper, who was sitting perfectly still, his brown eyes locked on my face, his tail doing that slow, uncertain wag that meant he wasn't sure what was happening, but he was ready to support, whatever I needed. "I've got that covered," I said. That night I called Amy. 18%, I told her, and heard her sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God, Rick, that's good, right? That's really good. Dr. Patel says it's something. Not a cure, but something. Something is more than nothing. Something is... God, I've been so scared. We've all been so scared." "I know, me too. What happens now?" "I keep fighting. Keep taking the medication. Keep living." There was a long pause. Then Amy said softly, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like you actually believe you might survive this." Did I? I wasn't sure. The medical reality was still grim. Stage 4 cancer didn't just disappear, and 18% shrinkage wasn't a miracle. But standing in my kitchen with Cooper pressed against my legs, and the knowledge that today I was better than yesterday, I felt something shift inside me. Not certainty, not confidence. Just the smallest, most fragile possibility that maybe, I could do this. February turned into March. The medication continued to work, though the side effects never eased. I lived on crackers and ginger ale and sheer stubbornness. My weight stabilized, then started creeping back up, not much, just a few pounds, but enough that my clothes didn't hang quite so loosely. My energy improved incrementally. Some days I could walk 2 blocks instead of 1. Some days I could stay awake past 8 p.m. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Cooper seemed to sense the change in me. He was still attentive, still stayed close, but there was a lightness to him now that hadn't been there during the darkest weeks. He started bringing me his toys again. The rope he loved to play tug-of-war with, the tennis ball that was his most prized possession, the stuffed duck that squeaked and that he'd been convinced was a real, albeit very stupid bird since the day I brought it home. "You want to play?" I asked one morning in mid-March as he dropped the rope at my feet and backed up in a play bow, his tail wagging furiously. He barked once, sharp and excited. I picked up the rope. My arms felt weak, and my grip wasn't what it used to be. But I pulled anyway. Cooper pulled back, growling playfully, his whole body engaged in the game. We played for maybe 30 seconds before I had to let go, breathing hard, but those 30 seconds felt like a victory. "Good boy!" I panted. "Good boy, Coop!" He dropped the rope and licked my face, his tail creating a small windstorm behind him. In late March, I had another scan. The tumor had shrunk another 12%. The cancer in my lymph nodes showed signs of regression. My liver function was improving. It still wasn't a cure. Dr. Patel made that clear, but it was undeniable progress. "I've never seen a response quite like this," he admitted, studying my charts with an expression somewhere between puzzled and impressed. "Your case is going to be very interesting for the research team." "I'm glad my suffering is scientifically valuable," I said dryly. He smiled. "That's not what I meant. I meant you're defying expectations, Rick, in a good way. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What I was doing was living, really living, for the first time since the diagnosis. I started sitting outside on good days, even when it was cold, just to feel the sun on my face and watch Cooper patrol the yard. I called old friends I'd lost touch with and had real conversations instead of awkward cancer updates. I dug out my architecture sketches, hadn't touched them since before the diagnosis, and started drawing again. My hands clumsy at first, but gradually remembering the movements, and every day, twice a day, I took Cooper for a walk. Some days it was just to the end of the driveway. Other days we made it around the block. Once, on an especially good day in early April, we made it 3 blocks to the corner store, where the owner gave Cooper a dog biscuit and me a "good to see you, man" that felt like the highest compliment I'd ever received. The walks became our ritual, our meditation, our proof that we were both still here and still fighting. "You saved my life, you know that," I told Cooper one morning as we stood at the end of the driveway, both of us breathing hard from the effort. "Everyone thinks it was the medication, but it was you. You kept me going when I wanted to give up." Cooper looked up at me with those impossibly brown eyes and wagged his tail, and I swear to God he understood every word. By the time the trees started budding and the last of the snow melted away, I'd been on the trial medication for 4 months. 4 months of fighting and suffering and refusing to surrender. 4 months of Cooper by my side, never wavering, never doubting. And I was still here, not cured, not healthy, but alive, fighting, living. And as spring began to paint Chicago in shades of green and gold, I allowed myself to wonder, what if this wasn't just borrowed time? What if this was the beginning of something more? They don't tell you what to do when you're supposed to be dead, but you're still alive. It was late May when Dr. Patel called me into his office for what I'd assumed would be my routine monthly appointment. But the moment I saw his face, not grave, not gentle, but genuinely shocked, I knew something had changed. "Your latest scan," he said, pulling up the images on his screen with hands that weren't quite steady. "Rick, I've reviewed it 3 times. I had 2 colleagues review it independently. I need you to understand what I'm about to tell you." Cooper, who'd been lying quietly at my feet, lifted his head, sensing my tension. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'm understanding." Dr. Patel turned the monitor so I could see the images, the familiar ghostly shapes I'd been studying for months, mapping the geography of my own mortality, except they weren't the same. The large mass that had dominated my pancreas, the spots on my liver, the shadows in my lymph nodes, they were smaller, dramatically smaller. "The primary tumor has shrunk by 78% since January," Dr. Patel said quietly. "The metastases in your liver are barely detectable. Your lymph nodes are clear. Your CA-19-9 levels, the tumor marker we've been tracking, are almost normal." I stared at the screen, trying to process what he was saying. "What does that mean?" "It means you're in remission, Rick. Functional remission. I can't call it a cure. Pancreatic cancer is too unpredictable, and you'll need monitoring for years. But right now, today, the cancer is not actively progressing. It's regressing." The word hung in the air between us. "Remission. How?" I whispered. "You said the trial medication rarely works like this. You said—" "I know what I said, and I don't have an explanation. Your response has been extraordinary, unprecedented in my 15 years of treating pancreatic cancer." He paused, studying me with those kind eyes. "I wish I could tell you exactly why this happened, why the medication worked for you when it fails for so many others. But medicine isn't always about finding explanations. Sometimes it's about accepting miracles. I don't believe in miracles." "Neither do I," Dr. Patel admitted, "but I believe in this." He tapped the screen, the images that proved I was somehow impossibly beating cancer that should have killed me 6 months ago. I drove home in a daze, Cooper in the passenger seat with his head out the window, ears flying in the spring breeze, completely unconcerned with the metaphysical implications of medical impossibilities. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to understand what I was supposed to feel. Relief, joy, terror that it wouldn't last. Cooper nosed my arm, reminding me that sitting in a parked car when there was a yard to explore was a waste of perfectly good living time. "You're right, buddy," I said. "Let's go home." Over the next few weeks, I slowly began to rebuild a life I'd thought was over. I contacted my boss at the architecture firm. Tom was shocked to hear from me, had assumed I was either already gone or too sick to work. We negotiated a part-time remote position to start. Just a few hours a week, but it was something. It was purpose beyond survival. I started gaining weight, real weight, not just bloating from medication. My face filled out. My arms didn't look quite so skeletal. I could walk to the park with Cooper again, not the long runs we used to do, but actual walks that lasted more than 10 minutes. Amy flew out in June. "I can't believe it," she kept saying, studying me like I was a ghost made flesh. "I was planning your funeral, Rick. I was writing your eulogy in my head, and now you're here." "I'm here," I agreed. We were sitting in my backyard, watching Cooper dig an elaborate hole near the fence, a project he'd been working on for days, and that I'd decided to allow, because who cared about the landscaping when I was alive to see it? What are you going to do, Amy asked, now that you have a future again? It was a question I'd been asking myself constantly. 6 months ago, I'd been making funeral arrangements. Now I had to make life arrangements, and I had no idea where to start. Live, I said finally. Just live. Everything else, I'll figure out as I go. Are you scared? She asked quietly. That it'll come back? Terrified, I admitted. Every ache, every moment of tiredness, every time I feel off, I wonder if this is it. If the cancer's back, if the miracle's over. How do you deal with that? I watched Cooper emerge from his hole, covered in dirt, looking enormously pleased with himself. One day at a time, one walk at a time, one moment at a time. Cooper trotted over and shook himself violently, sending dirt flying everywhere. Amy squealed and covered her face. I just laughed, really laughed, the kind of deep, genuine laughter I hadn't felt in almost a year. By July, I'd been in remission for 2 months. Dr. Patel reduced my appointments to once every 6 weeks instead of weekly. The trial medication dosage was lowered. I was still taking pills twice a day and would be for the foreseeable future, but the side effects had lessened. I could eat normal food again, could sleep through the night without pain waking me, could dream about tomorrow. One evening in late July, I did something I hadn't done since before the diagnosis. I drove to the animal shelter where I'd found Cooper 5 years ago. The building looked exactly the same. A low-slung brick structure with colourful murals of dogs and cats painted on the exterior walls, the sounds of barking and meowing audible from the parking lot. I sat in my car for a moment, Cooper looking at me quizzically from the passenger seat. Just need to see something, I told him. Inside, the shelter was busy. Families with kids looking at puppies, a young couple debating between 2 kittens. Volunteers walking dogs through the meet and greet area. I recognized Maria, the adoption coordinator who'd helped me find Cooper. She'd aged a bit, more grey in her hair, new lines around her eyes, but her smile was the same when she recognized me. Rick! Oh my God, Rick, you're... She stopped herself, clearly unsure what to say. You look great. I'm not dead, I said simply. Surprise. We heard you were sick. Really sick. I was. I'm not anymore, or at least not as sick. She came around the desk to hug me, and I let her, even though I wasn't usually a hugger. When she pulled back, she had tears in her eyes. Is Cooper with you? In the car, I wanted to ask. I paused, trying to find the right words. When I adopted him, you said he'd been returned 3 times, that families kept giving up on him because he had separation anxiety, because he was too needy. I remember. I need you to understand something. That dog, that needy, anxious, too much dog, he saved my life, not metaphorically, literally. He's the reason I fought, the reason I'm still here. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Rick, I came here because I wanted you to know that sometimes the difficult dogs, the ones nobody wants, the ones that get returned and overlooked, sometimes they're exactly what someone needs. Sometimes they're the miracle. We talked for a while longer, and before I left, Maria took me back to the kennels. Row after row of dogs, all waiting for someone to choose them. Young dogs, old dogs, purebreds and mutts, the tiny and the massive. So many lives waiting to begin. Do you ever think about adopting another? Maria asked. I looked at the dogs, each one desperate for attention, for love, for a chance. Then I thought about Cooper, waiting patiently in my car, the dog who'd been with me through the worst year of my life, and who'd never once wavered in his devotion. Maybe, I said, someday, when Cooper's ready to be a big brother. That night, I sat on my back porch with a beer, first one I'd had in a year, and it tasted like pure joy, and watched Cooper chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The summer air was thick and warm, cicadas singing their rhythmic song, the whole world alive and vibrant and possible. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Patel. Latest blood work looks excellent. Keep doing whatever you're doing. I looked at Cooper, who'd abandoned the fireflies and was now rolling on his back in the grass, all four paws in the air, making the ridiculous groaning noises that meant he was perfectly content. "What am I doing?" I asked him, "besides letting you destroy the yard?" He rolled over and looked at me, his face split in that goofy dog grin, his tail wagging. And suddenly I understood. What I was doing was loving him. That was it. That was the secret, if there was one. Not the medication, not the clinical trial, not the unexplainable medical miracle. Just love. Pure, uncomplicated, unconditional love, given and received in equal measure. The medication had attacked the cancer in my body. But Cooper had attacked the cancer in my spirit. The despair, the surrender, the belief that I was already dead. He'd refused to let me give up. Had forced me to keep moving, keep living, keep fighting, day after day after day. Had reminded me, with every tail wag and every walk and every moment of pure, present joy, that life was worth living even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. "Come here, Coop," I called. He bounded over and climbed into my lap, all 75 pounds of him, because he'd never learned he was too big to be a lapdog, and I'd never had the heart to teach him. He settled against me with a contented sigh, his head on my shoulder, his warmth solid and real and alive. "Thank you," I whispered into his fur. "Thank you for not giving up on me." His tail thumped once against my leg, and we sat there together as the stars came out, as the fireflies danced, as the world spun on toward tomorrow. It's been 3 years since that diagnosis in October. 3 years since Dr. Hernandez told me I had 6 months to live, maybe less. I'm still here. The cancer hasn't come back, at least not yet. Doctor, Patel doesn't like to use the word cured with pancreatic cancer. He says I'm in sustained remission and that I'm a statistical anomaly and that my case will be published in medical journals as an example of an unexplained positive outcome. I let him use whatever words make him comfortable. I know what I am. I'm alive. I'm back at work full-time now, designing buildings I'll hopefully live to see constructed. I've reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet. But it's nice to remember what it feels like to have possibility in my life beyond just survival, and Cooper is still by my side. He's 8 years old now, starting to show grey around his muzzle and slow down just a tiny bit on our walks. But every morning, he still brings me his leash at 7 a.m. sharp. Every evening, he still expects dinner at 6. Every night, he still climbs onto the bed and curls up beside me, his presence a constant reminder that I'm not alone. Last week I went back to the shelter and adopted a puppy, a gangly, anxious pit bull mix that had been returned twice for being too much to handle. Cooper wasn't sure about her at first, but by the end of the day, they were inseparable. Her name is Hope, because that's what this whole impossible, unexplainable, miraculous experience taught me. That hope is not some abstract concept or naive optimism. Hope is a choice you make every single day. Hope is getting up when you want to stay down. Hope is taking one more step when you think you can't. Hope is loving fiercely in the face of loss and fighting desperately in the face of despair. Hope is a golden retriever who refused to let his person give up. The doctors can't explain why I survived. The medication helped, certainly, but dozens of other patients in the same trial took the same pills and died anyway. My genetics didn't predict this outcome. My prognosis didn't allow for this possibility. But here I am. I don't tell people that Cooper saved my life. They wouldn't understand, would think I was being sentimental or delusional. They'd point to the clinical trial, the medication, the statistical anomaly of my cancer's response to treatment. And maybe they're right. Maybe it was all just medicine and luck and probability. Or maybe, just maybe, there are things science can't measure. Things that don't show up on CT scans or blood panels or double-blind clinical trials. Things like the power of being needed, the strength that comes from unconditional love, the will to survive that emerges when you have something worth surviving for. I can't prove that Cooper saved my life. But I know this. When I was dying, he gave me a reason to fight. When I was ready to surrender, he reminded me why life was worth living. When I had lost all hope, he became my hope. And now, 3 years later, when I wake up every morning to his face 3 inches from mine, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes full of love and trust and absolute certainty that today will be a good day. I remember that miracles don't always come from hospitals or clinical trials or medical journals. Sometimes they come with 4 paws and a tail and a heart big enough to carry you through your darkest night into the dawn of a new day. Sometimes miracles are simple. Sometimes miracles are exactly what you need. Sometimes miracles have been sleeping beside you all along, just waiting for you to recognize them. Cooper's head is on my lap right now as I write this. Hope is curled at my feet, snoring softly. The sun is setting over Chicago, painting my backyard in shades of gold and amber. And for the first time in 3 years, when I think about tomorrow, I'm not afraid. I'm grateful. Grateful for the time I have, however long it may be. Grateful for the love that saved me when medicine couldn't. Grateful for the miracle that came in the form of a too needy, anxious golden retriever who refused to let me die alone. They say dogs are man's best friend, but Cooper was more than that. He was my reason, my hope, my miracle, and for that, I will spend every remaining day of my life, however many I'm blessed to have, making sure he knows just how loved he is.